Hi, everybody. It's Michael Antonio, and welcome to Escape Hatches in the CDK. Okay, some notes. Today we'll be using CDK orchestration 0.1.22, and the code and slide for this lesson are checked into CDK orchestration examples in GitHub. Okay, escape hatches. There's a document, customized constructs from the AWS construct library. And if you haven't read it, I recommend that you do read it. I'll put a link in the description. This is also referred to as the escape hatch document. Okay, so what does it say in this document? Well, one thing it says is if you need an escape hatch from the CDK, you can just write your own L1 constructs. That will include in your template.json file exactly the CloudFormation that you'd like there. And so this is an escape hatch, and they basically say you could write your own CFN resource. I would say that you could just as well subclass an existing L1 resource if there's one for the type that you want, such as if you want to add properties to a bucket that maybe aren't supported completely by the CDK, you could subclass CFN bucket. But you could also just write a CFN resource, like they say in the document. You could write your own CFN element. This is really easy to do, and we'll in fact be doing that in this lesson. But I say if you have CloudFormation that you want to put into your template, you should really take a look at CFN include and consider using it because it will actually create L1 resources for you. And I think that that's just really useful. Maybe you'll see why later um, in this talk. Okay, so they also talk about possibly using Frankensteins or unescape hatches. Sadly, there are only two of them: bucket from CFN bucket and key from CFN key. So hopefully there'll be more of these in the future and we'll be able to do this more easily. But right now, it's just these two. So I won't be going over this. If you want to see these in action, go watch the video Finding Constructs. That's 2 videos ago in this series. Okay. And then the other thing that you can do is you can just modify L1 JSON. You can modify construct properties. You can add or change resource metadata, or you can call these add override, add deletion override, add property override, add property deletion override. These functions here will just go and change specific JSON paths one at a time for you in your construct. And what we're going to do today is we're going to use some of the techniques from finding constructs so that you can target your escape hatch to an L1 without your user having to do a lot of work searching the construct tree. And then they also recommend using custom resources. This is great if there does not exist a resource that does what you want, or if you just want to run a Lambda, you can use a CDK trigger to call a Lambda and basically do any kind of Git ops operation in your AWS account, assuming that you have like a CI/CD pipeline set up for your CDK project. Um, and then the other possibility is to use an AWS custom resource to write um, your custom resources, like writing an S3 file or adding a DDB table or anything that you can do with a single AWS SDK call. AWS custom resource is really great for. So those are just two really easy ways to write custom resources, and we'll be going over that as well. And oh, look, it's demo time. Okay, so again, over on the left here, I have the AWS Toolkit open so you can see our stack today is escape hatches. Once again, in our main, I've just created an app and I've added our escape hatches stack to it. And that's what gets us all of these resources over here. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these classes. So first, we're going to create an escape hatch construct. This one's called add salt. So what this does is this adds a build time timestamp with the property name of salt to a custom resource. So if you have a custom resource and you want that resource to run on every deployment, This will achieve that by making a modification to the input properties of the custom resource. Presumably, salt is a property that your custom resource isn't going to use, and so it'll just be there as a marker to say execute on every deployment. Now, the CDK triggers documentation says in the future we will consider adding support for additional re-execution modes, such as execute on every deployment. And I just say, well, we can do that now. And so I get my L1 construct, which is a CFN resource, and I call add property override. Now you can take this add salt construct and you can add this to an L1, L2, or L3 custom resource. And over here in get target, it will use custom resource utilities, find custom resource to find the L1 custom resource and then add that salt property to it. So the advantage of this is that you create one construct and it can add this feature to any custom resource, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so here is where I said that I would override CFN element, create my own CFN element, and this one I'm calling stack description because that's what it does. It returns the stack description key in your CloudFormation template. So it basically adds this template fragment to your output template for the stack, and it adds a description. And so we'll see what happens when we add a CFN element with a stack description to our template.json file. That'll be interesting. Okay, and now I have another escape hatch construct. This one is called add metadata. Now, the interesting thing about the add metadata function is that it works on both stacks and CFN resources. And so our add metadata construct also works on stacks and CFN resources. And it has a properties interface. All property interface members should be read-only, and so these are, and that's key and value. And so this will just be a really easy way for us to add metadata either to a stack or a CFN resource. And this is done very similarly to how we did add salt above. This is a construct which gets its target from a method here. And by putting target in a getter, subclasses can easily override the target. And for example, you can target a specific resource type in a subtree. And I'll show an example of that. So add metadata, same as add salt, it acts on its parent construct. That's why the first line of target is to get the scope of the escape hatch construct. And then here we're asking, well, is that scope a stack? And if it is, then we'll just return. If not, then we'll call CFN element utilities find CFN resource. And same as with find custom resource, if this finds one CFN resource, it'll return it. If it finds zero, it'll throw. And if it finds multiple, it will also throw. However, it does prefer the default child. So if you add it to an L2, even if that L2 has other L2s or L1s under it, it will add it to the default child, figuring that, well, you meant to add it to the L2, therefore uh, we should just do whatever it is to the default child. So that's how find CFN resource works. It returns the default child, or it returns the one and only one matching CFN resource, or it throws. Okay, so here's our stack escape hatches, and you can see that right up front I have given it a stack description. This is really the correct way or the usual way to change the description of a stack is to just put it in here. But if for some reason you want to add more to the description of the user stack, you can just create a construct like this. This one's the stack description one we did above. And it says here, this string will be in the stack description because that's what will happen. And so will this one. So I'm adding two of these stack descriptions, and we'll see how this merges in our final template.json to create one stack description. So here I'm calling that add metadata construct that we created, and add metadata is going to be adding metadata to this, which in this case is the stack, and the key will be elf, and the value will be arondir. Okay, and next I'm going to create a bucket. This is an L2 bucket. Therefore, add metadata will add to the L1 CFN bucket, which is a child of this bucket, and the key will be mountain, and the value will be Tanaquil. Okay, so now we're going to create a function. And the interesting thing about functions is functions are L2 constructs that have an L2 child. So the L2 child of this, if you don't pass in a role, is a function creates a role for you. Because you can't run a Lambda function without a role. So you can have either one or two L1 constructs under this, one for the Lambda function and one for the CFN role. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to call add metadata on this echo lambda. And since echo lambda is an L2, the metadata with a key of dwarf and a value of Balin is going to be added to the CFN function that is the default child of this L2 construct. Now, if I wanted instead to target the role, then I would override get target, and I would target this to, and this is very similar to the code that we have above in add metadata, where I call find CFN resource and I pass this.node.scope, but now I'm looking for a CFN role resource type. So it will check echo lambda default child, it'll say, well, that doesn't match CFN role, and then it will check the subtree under echo lambda, and it will find, and here's echo lambda, it will find a service role, which has a resource under it, which is an IM role that matches, and so we'll add metadata with a key of Maya and a value of Bombadilla. Okay. So we'll see that in the template.json file here. Okay, so now that I have a Lambda, I can write a trigger. And this trigger is going to run my Lambda. Now, normally it would only run my Lambda the very first time or when the trigger handler changes, because that's the way this custom resource is set up to work. But if I add salt to it, like they say in their documentation they want to do in the future, well, then it will trigger every time because I added this salt property, which changes on every build. And so we'll take a look at that. I can also do the same thing with an AWS custom resource. Since I created a bucket, I can create an AWS custom resource that writes out a JSON file to that bucket and has a physical resource ID of the S3 URI. I've actually shown this before I believe it was in Finding Resources as well. And here I'm calling run resource always, which is a class in my CDK orchestration library that does exactly the same thing as that salt. And so I just wanted to show that you can also do that to AWS custom resource. So let's go see what happened. Okay, so first thing you notice is the description here is both the description that I put in the constructor, and then there's a new line, and then there is the first CFN element description, and then the second CFN element description. So mostly CFN elements do not add a description, but in this case, I specifically did that, and you can see how the CDK merged those three descriptions together by putting them on separate lines in the template. The next thing that you'll notice is that we did end up with our stack metadata of key of elf and value arondir. The bucket that I created, my bucket, ends up in here with my bucket and a hash after it, which is from the CFN bucket that is a child of my bucket, the L1 construct. And you can see that the metadata with a key of mountain and a value of Tanaquil was added to my bucket, which is exactly what I want. Okay, so now we have this role. So this is the role from Echo Lambda. Remember, I created this Echo Lambda, and under it, I put function metadata and I also put role metadata, and the role metadata is what gave us this metadata with a key of Maya and a value of Bombadillo. It was able to find the role, uh, that is under its parent, which is Echo Lambda. So role metadata went and looked at Echo Lambda, went down the tree, found this role, and then added the metadata to it. Okay, and then we have our Lambda function here. So this is the L2, which is created by our inline Node.js function Echo Lambda, and it got metadata with a key of dwarf and a value of Balin, because that's what we added when we called add metadata and gave it a parent of Echo Lambda. Okay, so now here's our trigger. So this is a custom resource, and you can tell because it says custom : in front of it, and in front of its resource type. And you can see that it has properties, and some of those properties, this service token, this basically tells CloudFormation which Lambda to call, and then this parameter here is telling the trigger what Lambda I wanted it to call, which is the echo lambda. So this lambda here implements the custom resource. This is what the trigger calls. So this is basically a lambda calling a lambda. And then these parameters here also go to the service token, and it will look at these. And then this salt is the one that I added that does not get used either by the service token or by my handler. This is just basically telling CloudFormation that I want to run this custom resource on every deployment, because this value will change on every deployment, and so this resource will update. And lastly, I'll show you the AWS custom resource, which if you don't give it a resource type, ends up with a resource type of custom : AWS. So it's also a custom resource. And if you look in here, it'll say that create and update both right to S3. So that's why it says the service is S3 and action is put object. And you can see that I also added a salt value here, and it's the same exact salt value as we had on the previous one up here, 7979. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's how you would use escape hatches in the CDK to change properties in the template.json file. And hopefully with these techniques, you'll be able to write some really neat constructs that will be able to make a real difference to you and your users in how you use the CDK. I think it's really great having these escape hatch constructs, and not having to subclass like my L2 construct or an L1 construct to get the effect that I want, or to have just a free floating function. I think encapsulating these things in constructs is really the way to go, and hopefully you agree here. So thanks a lot, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.